It's a low bar. Okay. We're good to go? Yeah. Wait up, everyone. Jechqua, Willie Sellars, Cookbeat de Gechel, Squep Mulu. Hello, and I just wanted to, again, welcome the audience and welcome everyone that is watching online to the traditional territory of the Williams Lake First Nation, who is a part of the Secwepemc Nation. It's really hard not to get emotional on days like this. There's a number of different reasons that we could be emotional. But one of the things that really choked me up and pulled on my strings today was just how proud of a leader I am on how great our community was showcased by so many different people. It started with the welcoming of our Little Chiefs primary school and daycare, to the acknowledgement of the dancers, our cultural leaders, our elders, and starting us off in such a powerful and significant way, and really holding up our culture and our traditions and our ceremony. We talk about the revitalization of those key things and how it is contributing to the balance of our communities and that reconciliation discussion. We are a proud people. We are proud First Nations. And today I am a proud Canadian on top of all of those things. We stand with the leader of this country and we discuss things of significance that are going to really be and make a meaningful difference to how we move forward as a community, as a city, as a region, and as a country. And we hold up those survivors, those elders, and we honor them, and we allow them to share this really cool moment with the leader of this country and with our community, while at the same time holding up our culture and our Secwepemc heritage. And that is what makes me very proud today. It makes me very honored, but at the same time makes me very emotional. It gives me hope moving forward that the things and the commitments that we talked about today are going to, make that meaningful impact with Prime Minister Trudeau, so that we can move forward and expedite the healing process of First Nations people in this country. There is still a lot of work to do. We understand that and we acknowledge that. But this is a great first step, and I'm very proud. Ho and Kwaselton, all my relations.
Willie, come here, stand beside me. Thank you, Cookbee Willie, for your words and your leadership. I want to begin by thanking the elders, the drummers, the singers, the community members and leaders who welcomed us today onto the territory of the Williams Lake First Nations and the Secwepemc Nation. It's an opportunity to engage, to listen, to learn. I want to thank the elected officials who are here, including Todd Doherty, our fellow MP. I want to thank National Chief Roseanne Archibald, who's here, because this is really an important moment for this community to be coming together, an important moment for me to be hearing from them, but it's also an important moment along the path of reconciliation and truth that we must walk as a country. And the leadership that Willie and this community and council have shown in incredibly difficult times is one that I'm deeply moved by and glad to be here with today. As we are gathering here today, I begin by thinking also about the First Nations, Inuit and Métis leadership right now at the Vatican this week, talking about the terrible history that we are remembering and dealing with here today, but that also requires a response and an apology from the Catholic Church and the Pope. And I want to tell those strong and brave leaders in Rome today that we are with them as a government, but also as a country. We started this morning with an opportunity to sit down with elders, where they shared some of the pain and impacts of their times as survivors of residential schools, of the St. Joseph's Mission Residential School. Many of them have spent years not talking, not thinking about that incredibly difficult time in their life when they were students at that so-called school. But to help the community heal, to help the community get closure and understand where and what happened there to some of their fellow students, they shared over the past days and weeks, sometimes stories that they'd never shared before because they were too painful. But the courage and the strength of those elders touches us all deeply. And it is that desire not to look back to the past, but understand the past to build a better future that we are coming together today. Canada is committed to continuing funding for the Williams Lake First Nation in its continued search for truth and healing and closure. We're announcing $2.9 million today for phase 2 of the work they're doing. There will be more phases and more funding to come, but right now the focus on documenting and finding the truth, but also on supporting survivors, supporting a community that is being re-traumatized, as so many are across the country, by the terrible findings of 93 reflections, knowing there are so many more out there still to be found, to be remembered, to be honored. And we will be continued partners in this difficult moment, as long as it takes. I also got the opportunity to sit down with the Chief and Council to talk about issues of importance. One of the most important ones is ensuring that everything is done to make sure that all the information, all the records that exist out there be made fully available to this community, to find the truth, to give closure, to track down and honor the memories of all those lives lost in this shared history that is such a dark one, of residential schools, both for this community and communities around, but also for the whole country. As we reflect on the path of truth and reconciliation that we need to walk, we need to understand that this is not just history of the Sweatbook Nation or of Williams Lake First Nation. It's not just the history of Indigenous peoples. It's Canada's history. And it is on all of us to be part of the learning, the grieving, the truth, and the reconciliation that this requires. People continue to think that reconciliation is about Indigenous peoples or is about Indigenous peoples and the government. But at the same time as those so-called residential schools were teaching Indigenous children that they had no worth and no value, every other school in this country was teaching non-Indigenous kids that Indigenous kids had no value. This is our history as a country. And until we properly grasp it and engage with it, understand it, and commit ourselves to better, then we're not living up to the kind of country we all like to think we are. We have work to do. La route vers la réconciliation demeure longue, mais elle doit impliquer tout le monde. Tous les Canadiens ont une responsabilité d'être présents, d'être engagés, d'être conscients, d'être responsables. Pas juste de notre part à jouer qu'on a joué, nos ancêtres ont joué dans le passé, mais d'être responsables pour aujourd'hui et pour l'avenir. The impacts of residential schools that have been closed for a long time are not just in the history, they're today. They continue in intergenerational trauma, in socioeconomic outcomes, in challenges around mental health and addictions and loss of opportunity and loss of identity and loss of language, that mean we have work to do now, long after the last residential school closed, that we need to continue to do to heal and to move forward. And that is the commitment Canada and Canadians continue to make every day as we stand in partnership with Indigenous peoples on a real path forward for us all. Merci tout le monde. Now happy to pass it over to Minister Miller.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Hello et bonjour à tout le monde. I want to thank Cookie Sellars for the warm welcome, all the survivors for sharing some very, very painful truths with us today. For a guy like me sitting in Ottawa, it's something that we need to hear. It's something that we can't look away from. I'm not Indigenous. I think people guess that. You just have, and I can't come up with the solutions alone in Ottawa. Neither can the Prime Minister. These conversations are not only an opportunity for some people, and I think it might shock the conscience to many to hear that many survivors are speaking out for the very first time. It takes an immense amount of courage. I think it's also an important opportunity to honor those that continue to suffer in silence and will perhaps never speak out. And their memories need to be preserved as well. This is it's a very, very difficult thing as someone who grew up very proud of their country to look at a very ugly truth. And this can't be a partisan thing. I look at Todd Doherty, who's not from my party and doesn't share many of my views, but he sure as hell wants to get to the bottom of a very nasty truth for the people that he loves and his neighbors. So I really, really appreciate him being here today and putting his heart into it, because it takes all parties to be doing this and to be invested and involved in this. We keep hearing some things that ask us as a government to push our thinking and to go past some of the easy answers we give and then go home thinking we've given something complete, knowing that the next day it's wildly incomplete. The question that I keep asking myself, I think we all have to ask ourselves after talking to people, is what does a healed country look like? And I don't have the answer to that. The Prime Minister doesn't have the answer to that. We can't even begin to formulate an answer in Cabinet and government without continuing to hearing from survivors, their realities, and what we need to do to move forward in recognizing that truth, but also continuing with communities on their path, on their pace. It's something the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has said to us. The government was responsible for this. Religious institutions were responsible for this. We can't walk in with big boots and say we have all the answers. We can't force the RCMP in. It just isn't the right thing to do, and we know it because it's been tried before. So when we work with communities for this next phase of funding, which is just under $3 million, it's at the pace of the community, and it's knowing the painful position that Chief Sellars is in, having to be the imperfect voice of those survivors who have yet to speak out and those who are speaking out. In addition to the dozens and dozens in other communities that had kids ripped from them and driven to a central point in what amounted to labor camps. So, this is difficult work. It will take time. I know people wanted answers yesterday, but for the sake of the community, their own protocols and the need to heal, We need to allow the communities to take the time they need and then inform us as to what we need to do to support them and not the reverse. So I just want to thank everyone for allowing us to come into the communities, sharing with us their views, their truths, and it's a truth that we can't look away from. Thank you.
I just wanted to acknowledge the two, strong, resilient Indigenous women that we have standing up here with us. We have the National Chief, Roseanne Archibald, to my right, who I'm going to get to say a few words in a minute just to acknowledge her presence, but also former Chief, Elder, and one of our lead researchers, Nancy Sandy, standing with us and showing their strength and their resilience and just, the success of their past in being a survivor and carrying on those cultures, that culture, carrying on that language, and carrying on what it is to be a success story in our communities post residential school. We have to hold them up, and I would really like to hear Roseanne say a few words before we get into Q&A.
Thank you very much, Cookpee. I'm very grateful to be here today. I want to acknowledge the creator of the world around us and our place within it. And I want to acknowledge Cookpee Sellars, his council, all the members of Williams Lake, and all the dignitaries here who have gathered. I want to say miigwech to the Prime Minister for making this announcement, for coming all the way up here, along with my friend Mark Miller. And I know that the road ahead is a long one, and I know that what we're all working toward is the healing path forward, that we are trying to find that together. And there are still over 130 institutes across this country that have yet to come forward with their own searches. And so this journey that we're on together is a long one, and it's painful. And I was really so blessed today to see the Prime Minister and Minister Miller talking to survivors, and to watch that interaction was such an honor for me, because they were sharing so much of themselves, and some of them broke down and cried, and they were so emotional, and it made me emotional. And I know that that interaction with Prime Minister Trudeau is an important one. It's an important one because I believe that when you touch somebody's heart, you help them to understand the importance of healing. And I believe that this is the journey that we're on with this Prime Minister. So I want to say miigwech, Prime Minister Trudeau, for being here, and thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you, Todd. We had a good conversation earlier, and what Mark said is absolutely true. This is a nonpartisan issue. We all care about our children, and we've got to start working together across those party lines, or you have to across party lines. I'm not in a party, but I certainly want to embrace anybody who wants to walk the healing path forward. Miigwech.
Thank you for taking questions. So the National Chief just mentioned there are 130 institutions, and also in 2015, that's when the TRC released its report. So it has been almost 7 years, and communities are still saying they don't have access to, unfettered access to the complete records that they need. And so I understand this, things take time, but what, on the government side of things is holding that up, and what are you doing to expedite that for not just this community, but others?
In the years following the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, this government has moved forward on fulfilling and partnering with Indigenous leadership and communities on all the recommendations out of the TRC. A big piece of that was ensuring that all records that we have were turned over. One of the things we did was created the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, which was one of the recommendations out of the TRC, to be the place that actually manages all those records. And we've endeavored to give all those records over. There is still work to do. There are still privacy concerns that I think we need to put aside because the truth is more important. But there is a process in place. But as Minister Miller has said many times, as I have said many times, we are committed to sharing all the information that can possibly be found to allow for healing, to allow for closure, and to allow for us to move forward with full understanding of what the terrible truth of our history is.
Prime Minister, you mentioned healing. There's been a lot of conversation about healing centres, not only in Kamloops, but also here as well. This money is obviously to help find the truth in searches, but where is the money for those healing centres, for those individuals who are currently being re-traumatized by the telling of these stories and this experience?
Part of the $2.9 million we're announcing today is for community supports and healing, but we know there's much more needed. But we also know that it's not Ottawa that should be deciding, who needs what centre, where, and how it should be run. That is something that we have ongoing cooperations and discussions with communities across the country on what their needs are, what they want to see as a solution, what their priorities are, and we're there to be supports, to be partners, and to let them lead the way on that. But perhaps I can let Mr. Miller speak to that briefly as well.
Yeah, and it's a good question because what we've heard from survivors consistently, although all narratives are unique, is there is a message of hope out there, but it has to go through long-term healing, and wellness centers is an integral part of that discussion, as well as the future of education in Indigenous communities, which is a separate topic but a very important one because we don't want to be reproducing the model. So what we've heard consistently is specifically that, not only accompanying survivors as people do circles or with the appropriate personnel to get to talk about the stories and document the stories, to get a story out and properly documented. I mean, you could speak to the elder that guided me around with the survivors. It can take days, and you need translators, and it's a very laborious process, but it is re-traumatizing. There's a lot of scars that are getting reopened. The $320 million the Prime Minister announced in August, just prior to the election, a good chunk of that fiscal pressure is on supports for communities. And that money is, I hope to be, actually to the earlier question, be giving an update to Canadians in and around May or June about the state of searches around the country. Not all have started, but there are a chunk of them underway. Places like Kamloops and Williams Lake are well ahead of things, but there are some communities where these are underway, but they're not in the same state as they are today. So there's a profile there to be shared with Canadians. But certainly the amount of funds we know that are currently allotted will not be enough. And that's what we're looking for in the next stages as we're trying to profile how this impacts out across what could be well over 100 institutions.
And Prime Minister, just in French as well for my colleagues, please.
Nous savons qu'on a beaucoup de travail à faire encore, mais le travail ne peut pas être dirigé par Ottawa. On doit être des vrais partenaires aux communautés autochtones pour leurs priorités, à leur rythme, pour leurs institutions, de la bonne façon. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on est en train de faire. On a mis de l'avant des sommes importantes pour investir, pour créer ces partenariats pour les solutions qui sont les plus importants, les plus prioritaires pour les communautés. Mais on va avoir besoin de plus d'argent pour le long terme aussi, et on va continuer d'être là pour ça en partenaire.
I was just curious as to when you yourself first ever heard a residential school story as a young Canadian.
I was very fortunate in that part of tagging along with my father as he did his work when I was a kid. I got to meet with extraordinary Indigenous leaders and community members across the country, from the far north to beautiful parts of BC and elsewhere. I know that even back then there were still residential schools going on. So I can tell you I don't know the first time I had a conversation with a residential school survivor, but I suspect I was probably 4 or 5 years old. I do know that over the years, I have come, like so many Canadians, to understand how much deeper the harm and the trauma was than even those of us who knew a little bit about it. I've told the story a number of times, but in the history classes I took, Indigenous history and Canada's history around Indigenous peoples, even in what were objectively pretty good schools, were mostly met with a shrug. We weren't taught the story of Canada, the true story of Canada, the Indigenous story of Canada. And that's something that now we are seeing transform. My kids know far more about residential schools at 8 and 13 years old than I did at 20, 25 years old. And that is a process that is good, but is also challenging for us as a country. And we need to make sure that we are telling the stories. And part of that is understanding that reconciliation is not just about Indigenous peoples. It's about all Canadians, because this is our history, all of us. And this shapes our present and shapes our future.
Prime Minister, when you said today that you came to listen and learn, and I know there was a lot of sharing today, so there's probably a lot to absorb, but what is one new thing you learned today? And it might be a hard one, but what one new thing that you could share with the rest of the country that you learned?
I think one of the things that those of us who are privileged to serve and to try and be very active partners in reconciliation deal with is we're constantly hearing about the trauma, about the sadness, about the loss that is being lived on a daily basis through intergenerational impacts, through memories, through elders. And it's easy to forget or to focus on those terrible things that we do need to focus on. And remember that alongside that, the capacity for strength and joy and celebration and generosity and openness that I have consistently experienced from Indigenous communities, even with all the trauma, all the pain, all the broken relationships and partnerships we've seen over decades, generations and centuries. The positivity that is not naive, that is very strong and focused on we need to keep working together. But the idea that yes, we can build a better future for all Canadians together. We can learn from the terrible dark history and not repeat it. We can move forward in genuine deep partnership. I think after the centuries and generations and decades of broken promises, that I can still stand here as Prime Minister of Canada, who carries the weight of all previous Prime Ministers on my shoulders and the impact that that has had in this community, to be able to stand here as partners in building a future for this community and for all Canadians is, I think, a testament to the incredible strength and grace of Indigenous peoples who have lived horrific trauma and continue to believe that tomorrow will be better because we will all work together on making that. And that's something that is a faith that is humbling for me as a leader in a very complex time in the world.
This may be kind of the same question, but I'll ask. Now, having been here in person and have visited with the Williams Lake First Nation, how has your perspective changed?
It was an honor and humbling in the real sense of the word to be able to sit with elders who shared with me their strength and their trauma. But I know a little later this afternoon I'm going to get to go and walk amongst the the burial site. And I know that is an image that is an experience like when I was in Cowessess, like when I was in the Kamloops, that will mark me and continue to mark me in an extraordinarily visceral way. That these aren't just numbers or statistics or stories of long ago. These are stories that are every bit as real today in the memories, in the trauma carried by elders, as they are in the echoes of residential schools that every subsequent generation has felt from their parent or their grandparent who is in residential school, who saw things that no child should ever have to see, who lived through things that no child should ever have to live after. And we're in a time of tremendous challenges in the world, of war in Ukraine, of a global pandemic, of things that make us seem, oh my gosh, we're so lucky to be in Canada. And we are. But we have to know that we are not immune to the kinds of evil, the kind of things that marked our very recent history, that we have to continue to commit ourselves to being better than every single day.
Thank you to the Williams Lake First Nation for having us on your territory, and Prime Minister, thank you for taking our questions. Prime Minister Trudeau, some critics are questioning the timing of this visit, seeing that the possible unmarked graves were discovered about 2 months ago. Can you tell us why this visit is coinciding with the Vatican visit? I mean, some critics are saying that you're just, using this as a photo op to align with the Vatican visit. Why? What's your counter argument? Why do you feel like that's not the case?
I'm here in my first visit to BC since my visit with Chief Archibald to the Kamloops First Nation in the fall, because Willie invited me, because this is a moment where the community is grieving. I wish I could have been here months ago. I'm able to get here now. I hope to be able to come back. This is about a time where we come together, that if the entire country is talking about reconciliation, that is a good thing. If it ties in with the Vatican visit, that's highlights for Canadians that this is, amidst all the other news going on in the world, still an unbelievably important story for Canadians. But for me, it's a privilege to be here. But Willie, maybe you want to say a couple words about me being here today, and should I have been here a week ago, or should I have been here a week from now?
Yes. No, I think those are great points. It's not a timing thing. Could potentially be the case. I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any means. And I mean, when we offered the invite on behalf of Council and the Williams Lake First Nation, it was from a proactive phone call that came from the Prime Minister. He reached out to us to make sure that we were okay as a community, what kind of help we needed as a community. And it was those words in that discussion that prompted us to invite him to this community. The timing of him coming here could have been the case, but the Creator works in funny ways sometimes. I was picked actually to be on that Vatican trip, and I decided not to go, and here we are. The Creator put me in a position to host the Prime Minister on behalf of my community, and to be a part of this historic and monumental day for not only the Williams Lake First Nation, but the city of Williams Lake, the Caribou-Chilcotin, in the interior of British Columbia. And I think it does really go a long way for us in seeing the supports and the Prime Minister showing up and standing with us and supporting us during these trying times and making the commitments that he's doing with his government.
Thank you. That concludes today's press conference. Oh, my apologies.
Sorry, I wanted to address your question specifically. the Vatican trip is about the papal apology, that the Pope is going to come to Canada and apologize for what the church has, the role of the church. And I think what's important about this event and why I also am here is because we're going to the site shortly, and those children that are buried there don't have a voice. They don't have a way to express their pain, to tell their story. And so the survivors that went to the Vatican are doing that for them. They're not only petitioning for themselves, they're petitioning for these children, these little ones who didn't make it home. And that's why we're standing here. We're standing here for those little ones. That's what we're doing. And the idea that you have to do one thing or the other doesn't make sense to me. We have to start talking about this issue around the world. We're talking about it in Rome. We're talking about it here. It's an important time. It's an important visit. And I'm really grateful that we've all gathered here today to tell this story, because this is a long story, as I said. And so thank you for your question.